Right, Kevin, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on the Positive Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well, brother. My my friend from across the pond, as we like to refer to each other. I'm in Los Angeles, you're in England, and I'm so happy to see you again, man.
Yeah, you too, man. It's always a blast to reconnect with you, and we've known each other for some time now, haven't we?
Yes, I know it's been a long time since we did our last podcast. I think we met during the pandemic and we've put out quite a good number of really high quality episodes. So I always enjoy my conversations with you. And I was excited to talk to you about today's topic because it's something that you have quite a bit of experience with in your line of work outside of the podcast. I don't know if your listeners know what you do on a day-to-day basis, but I think you're going to be an expert in what we're about to discuss.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've touched base on it a little bit in a few episodes. But yeah, I think it's a good topic because, like you said, I see it quite frequently, and I've also seen it, in people, clients' relationships sometimes. And, like we talked about, like self-medicating, and people do that with all sorts of things. And there's tons of substances out there, in the States, in the UK, and I see it, in my work, and then, I see it on social media, clips as well, like in parts of LA or, Skid Row and
Oh my
certain
God.
areas. It's
Skid
pretty
Row is
wild.
Skid Row is the another level. So just to clarify, you work in an addiction rehabilitation center, right?
So my role is so I work as a resettlement worker. So I work with people who are homeless or
Okay.
sofa surfing, insecurely housed, rough sleeping on the streets, and I try and help them gain, accommodation, but also, there's things I can help them with in their job. I can get them like thing we call them food banks over here. We get them food parcels from like the food charity place, and I can take them to them. And there's quite a lot we can do. Um, obviously there's government budgets and all the rest of it, but we that's what I tend to do. But I have a caseload of clients that I see, and obviously I can't go into detail about them, but
Of
they're
course.
they're all different and got different circumstances.
Got it. So I work a lot on addiction in my private practice. It's not with people who are homeless or rough sleeping or down and out. Uh, there was about a year and a half period where I did do that. I worked for the city of Los Angeles. I was working for the government, and I was I was working with homeless people and people who are, you know, experiencing abject poverty, and it probably 80 to 90% of the time went hand in hand with drug addiction. Now I'm on the other side of that spectrum where I'm seeing very highly functioning people, people who've got jobs, husbands, wives, kids, money, people who are building up their careers, people who are good looking, people who do not look like they are sleeping under a freeway bridge or anywhere near. But they very often have addictions, and sometimes they don't like to admit that they have addictions, but at the very least, they'll admit that they are abusing a substance. Uh, for example, they'll say, yeah, I smoke more weed than I should, or I take Adderall a little more often than I should, or yeah, I'm probably drinking a little bit too much. But they won't call themselves an addict because people, first of all, often stigmatize addiction, and they think of a true addict as the type of person that you might be seeing on a day-to-day basis, somebody who's got scratches and marks all over their body and bruises and, you know, they're homeless and their family won't talk to them and all of this kind of stuff. Um, so instead, people that I meet, people I see in my private practice tend to use this term self-medicate, right? And the thing is, there's not much difference between self-medicating and addiction. It's just that they are 2 points on the exact same spectrum. The addiction and the homelessness and the abject poverty is the last stop on that bus route, right? But the self-medicating in order to escape pain or suspend reality or deal with rejection or deal with some sort of a traumatic event is the first stop on that bus route, right? Sometimes the first stop on the bus route is recreational drug use for fun. But even then, in order to have fun, you have to go out one night and do a bunch of cocaine, that's a type of self-medicating, right? Because if you need to get that high, then what exactly are you running away from? So I just think it would be interesting to have a conversation with you about this because we're seeing people who self-medicate and we're seeing people who have addiction, and they seem to be worlds apart, but I think that they share the same seeds, which is that desire to use a substance in order to cope with some sort of trauma or pain or extenuating life circumstance that has made their lives unmanageable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, like you said, there's that addiction, isn't there? And then, that caught up in that loop of doing that for, you know, taking away certain emotions or blocking things out. But then you said there's at the very start, it could be a traumatic experience or something that's happened, which is then compounded, and then they're drinking or whatever to kind of mask whatever they're feeling below the surface. And it's that thing when you peel it all the way back, what it goes back to. And then over time, that's that kind of reason why they're doing it. And I think some people kind of are not aware that's the reason why they're doing it. They're just caught up in that cycle of just doing it. And I think the dangers are people gain certain tolerances sometimes to certain things, so then they move on to other things, and then they move on to other things, and then before they know it, they're hooked on all sorts of stuff. And
Right.
I've seen this firsthand with some, in my job, where people have had a relationship breakdown, the job breakdown, maybe at the same time, compounded with previous trauma in their past. And like you said, they had a job and, place and normal life. And then they've ended up homeless, and then they've ended up drinking, and then they've ended up being offered, crack or whatever on the streets. And then they've been hooked on that. And then I've seen it, positively come full circle where some clients have gone through that and they're now sober, but they've had to hit rock bottom somewhere, or there has to have been something that's happened to them where something's clicked, which has forced them to think about themselves and want to change.
Do you believe that a person has to hit a rock bottom, which is either they lose their job, they lose their spouse, they get arrested, they end up homeless, they become depressed out of their skull in order to catalyze that change? Or do you believe that a person can catch themselves going down a bad path and turn it around before it gets to the rock bottom?
Yeah, I think both. I think both really. I mean, I've seen it where people have been on that slope going down and they've had options in front of them, but they've got caught up amongst the people in their environment and got sucked back into that criminal behavior or using drugs or whatever.
Mhm.
And then people have had something happen significant, maybe to their health, or they've had, like a realization and they've looked around and they've seen what they're surrounded by and they've realized however many years have gone by and I'm still in this place. And then they're one or there has to be, I think, a significant motivator for them to change. Sometimes if they have children or there's something that they want to be a part of on a positive is a driving force, I find.
Right.
Or if
They have a higher power, they have a community, they get offered a second chance at life. There's something that motivates or inspires them to make a change for a cause that's greater than themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, also being listened to by myself and people I work with in drug and alcohol. I work with, police and drug and alcohol services and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And some people, I think, once they know they've got that bit of support and they're being cared for and they can attend talking groups and they get into the swing of doing these things, they kind of able to work through stuff, I think. And because I'll say to people, I'm here to help, but it works both ways. I mean, you've got to show up basically and
Sure.
for things to progress.
I've always said that there are three reasons why people make a major change in their lives. I think the first reason is the rock bottom that we were talking about, which basically means that the problems a person is facing are sufficiently intolerable that any alternative is better, right? A person's life becomes so unmanageable that they are basically forced to make a change because it can't get worse than what they're dealing with right now. The second reason I see people make changes is that they have a moment of clarity or a moment of fear where they see someone that they do not want to become. They see their father, they see their grandfather, they see themselves heading down a path that would feel like a betrayal of their own dignity and a betrayal of their own soul if they ended up like that. So they have the foresight to stop themselves and change course. And the third reason that I see people change is that they're the recipient of some type of miracle. They have a guardian angel, an uncle, a therapist, a friend, God. Somebody comes into their life and says, come on, let me help you with this. And they're receptive to it, right? Now, the most common, those are listed in order of how common they are. The most common is people don't make a change till they hit a rock bottom. After that, sometimes you see the people who see that they're heading down a bad path and they don't want to do it because they don't want to end up like that grandparent or uncle or ex-girlfriend or whatever. And then after that, the least common is that someone or something comes into a person's life and saves them and gives them another opportunity, and they're willing to take it. And I think the reason that that's the least common is that you cannot force willingness. You can't inspire willingness. You could be down and out, and I could be your friend, and I could come to you 7 days a week trying to be your guardian angel and trying to help you, right? But if the willingness piece on your end is not there, then everything that I say is going to fall on deaf ears. And, going back to the topic of self-medicating and addiction, I think that people don't have a willingness to change their behavior, change their addictive tendencies, change their self-medication, change their self-destructive behaviors, because if they removed that crutch, it would require for them to look at what landed them in that position in the first place. It would require a lot of working through trauma, a lot of deep introspection, a lot of facing reality rather than running away from it. And who has the willingness to do that? I mean, I don't want to do that. You know what I'm saying? It's an extremely tall order to ask someone to remove the crutch that they rely on to get through the pain of day-to-day life, and on top of it, have the willingness to look into how they got there in the first place and hold themselves to that standard of accountability. That's a very, very difficult thing to ask a person to do, especially a person who's been severely traumatized or has had a really rough incident in life that they're trying to deal with. You know what I mean? So I don't blame or judge anybody who feels the need to self-medicate with weed, alcohol, recreational drugs, whatever. I see through it. I see that they're not just doing it because they have anxiety or because they need to go to sleep or because they want to have fun. All of that stuff is nonsense. There's always a deeper reason. But I don't judge it. The one thing that I want to emphasize is that it all starts with self medication. It all starts with having a problem that's really hard to face. So you're using some sort of external substance in order to cope with the problem. There is no homeless person addicted to fentanyl living under a freeway bridge who didn't start with that problem. So it's just a matter of degree. You know, my client who's a billionaire, a literal billionaire, but smokes weed 5 to 10 times a day, and that's not an exaggeration. If it gets out of control, he's only a few degrees away from losing it all and ending up on that under that freeway bridge. And it's because what do those people from two completely separate worlds have in common? What they have in common is the fear of facing their pain and the decision to use a substance to ease it. And again, I don't judge that or blame that, but I think it's really important that we dispel this myth that drugs and alcohol are for fun. They're not fun. They're something that people use as a solution to a very, very difficult problem. And then that solution ends up becoming their problem. And as you said, it goes in this cyclical nature where it just becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like you said, with, you talked about, why, the complexities of life and why people are using substances and the, the ability to not use whatever substance it is, whether it might be smoking or drinking or whatever, and having to go into, go through those traumas and um, be introspective and look within and deal with things. It's almost like standing at the forefront of a mountain, isn't it? Escape, and then saying, "Here's your rucksack. Here's your stuff. You've got to, you got to walk up that now." And you'd be like, thinking, Christ, I can't, and it's one step at a time, isn't it? And I think it's kind of
Yeah.
having these healthy stages in some way where people are able to do that bit by bit. Because I think sometimes people want to do it, they want to get this sorted, they want to do this, want to do this. And it's like, well, you got to just slow down. Do you know what I mean? Do this first because you could do too much and get overwhelmed. And I've seen people sometimes get overwhelmed with too much support. They've
Oh,
got
what do you mean?
myself yeah, they've got like different services contacting them and they want to see them for different appointments. I find people can sometimes get overwhelmed with, having too many services trying to meet them for appointments, but they're all trying to help. So it's like trying to have that healthy balance of what they can manage sometimes. But like you said, a lot of it all ties in and relates to trauma and people, we can all be in that situation. We could all end up in that place. And, it's about trying to manage things and balance things out. And, I know loads of people who, they'll might smoke weed, but they can hold down the job. But I think if it's interrupting your life and your work, then it can just compound and become a problem, can't it? So I think if people can manage it and they're disciplined, I think that's probably okay. But I like to, like I said before we started recording, I said I've stopped drinking really
Mhm.
because I did a Christmas and I felt rotten. Like after Boxing Day, I felt really sick.
A
You
crisp
know, I
Christmas? What's that?
I like Santa Claus and all that jazz.
Oh, okay. And what, you were drinking a lot?
Yeah, it was Boxing Day. We have Boxing Day, like Boxing Day
Oh,
time,
we
the
don't have Boxing Day in
festivity.
the States.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah,
Boxing Day is the day after Christmas, right? In the
yeah,
UK?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So we had that, and I had, I think I only had I had a couple of glasses of rum. I had a few
Okay.
double glasses of rum, and that was it. But it was spiced apple rum, and I think it's quite sickly. And I just felt ill because I don't really drink, and I just got fed up of feeling that feeling, and that was my kind of motivated to not really do it, as much or do it on special
Listen,
occasions.
I'm not saying that people have to be completely sober. I'm not trying to be the
Yeah,
drug
yeah.
and weed and alcohol police.
Oh no,
Uh,
no.
the thing that concerns me is that when people are habitually using a substance in order to medicate themselves and in
Yeah.
order to run away from their problems, I think that's very, very different than having a couple of glasses of rum on Christmas.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But, I always say that the way you know how much you love yourself is reflected in the decisions that you're making every day. So if you look at your decision making, that is your indication of your level of self-love. And when you had a couple glasses of rum and you felt like shit the next day, excuse my language,
It's
and
fine.
then you said, you know what? I don't really want to do this anymore because this makes me feel like shit.
Mm,
That is a decision that indicates a huge level of self-love and self-respect.
mm,
If you had a couple of glasses of rum and you felt like shit the next day, and then you woke up and you said, "Ooh, I need a little hair of the dog. I need something to smooth this over, so I'm going to have a few beers now." That is a decision that indicates that you do not love and value yourself very much.
mm,
So it's not the results that we get in our lives that determine how much we love ourselves. It's not whether you have a girlfriend, how much money is in your bank account, where you live, how in shape you are, right? Because sometimes we strive for certain things and we don't get the desired result. What indicates how much we love ourselves is the decisions that we are making throughout the day and whether we are fulfilling our daily obligations. This morning, when I woke up and I thought about what I need to do today in order to be a productive person, a successful person, a compassionate person, did I make decisions that moved me closer to those goals or farther away from those goals? That's how you know whether you truly love yourself. So you made a decision that most people don't make. Most people say, "Ugh, I feel like shit today. I'm gonna sleep it off. never going to drink again. This is horrible. 2, 3 days later, it's the weekend and they're right back to drinking, right? And that's because that level of self-worth and self-love and self-respect have not been developed yet. And speaking of commonalities, I was saying that, the rich lawyer who self-medicates using Adderall or weed is not so different from the addict who lives under a freeway bridge. It's just a matter of degree, right? Another one of these really interesting commonalities is that both of those people have a deep level of shame. Both of those people have very low self-worth. Even if you meet somebody who's narcissistic and they're rich and they're a celebrity and they're a baller and they seem to have everything under control, that person doesn't, don't be fooled. That person doesn't actually have a very high opinion of themselves, because if they did, then they would be making decisions that weren't self-destructive.
Yeah,
So
I,
it's
I
a
agree.
completely different way of looking at self-love. It's not about like, oh, I wake up this morning and like God loves me and I love myself and I'm going to say all these affirmations in the mirror, although the affirmations are good. It's really about, what are the decisions that I'm making, and do those decisions reflect a person who feels worthy and values themselves, or do those decisions reflect a person who doesn't have a very high opinion of himself or herself?
Where do you think the kind of starting places for people who are kind of in that place? So if you say working with them, um, getting them to look at trauma or, like where do you think the step, do you think it's them owning what's going on and looking at why they're doing what they're doing and taking
Are you saying,
accountability, do you think?
what do I think is the origin of
Like,
their self-medication or their issues?
yeah, and getting them to look at that. If you was, say, working with someone who was going through that, like, what do you think's the kind of starting point for them to start working on it? Do you think them
So,
accepting?
okay, so I think there's a threefold answer to this question. So, um, one thing I think you're asking is, what's required for a person to get better?
Yeah.
And to that, I would say willingness, a lot of personal accountability, and a support team, not doing it on your own.
Hmm.
You also need to connect yourself to something greater than yourself, whether that's your God or that's your church or that's your job or that's your family. It can't be only for you. Another question that's baked into this is, what are the circumstances that landed a person in the position where their life has spun out of control? And there are innumerable answers to that. It could be rape. It could be an abusive father. It could be a beautiful, loving home, but getting bullied at school. It could be a car accident, and then you're prescribed OxyContin for your pain, and then that leads to becoming a heroin addict. It could be not knowing how to deal with your stress in your job, so you use alcohol to take off the edge. But if we're talking about the origin, the seed that sets a person up to begin self-medicating in the first place, it's the same for everybody. A lot of people will tell you that those people have shame and that they have low self-worth. Those are things we talked about a moment ago. But there's a seed that starts even before then. And the interesting thing is that if you look at every single person who has ever had a messed up life, whether they were a functional addict, whether they were a homeless person under a freeway bridge, whether they're a celebrity who made millions of dollars and then ended up dying, whether they're a criminal in jail. Any person who has ever dealt with their lives going down a bad path, they have the same exact root, which is that one of their primary attachment figures went wrong. We have three sets of primary attachment figures. When we're a baby, it's our parents. When we're an adolescent, it's our peers. And then when we're an adult, it's our romantic partner. Every single person who has ever ended up with an addiction, losing all of their money, being a criminal, being depressed, having severe anxiety, something went wrong with one or multiple of those three attachment figures. Either their parents were negligent, or their peers made them an outcast and they bullied them, or their first love broke their heart, or they had to suffer a terrible divorce. But what it all comes down to, the root, even though all of the surrounding circumstances may be different, is that if we do not have secure, healthy attachment from the three primary sources, which none of us do, because who has a life that's charmed enough to have that, then we end up with problems. And it's just a matter of degree. It's just a matter of how bad, how badly messed up did your attachment figures, how badly did your attachment figures mess you up? You know what I'm saying? And then that leads to all sorts of permutations of the roads that can lead you down.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's really beneficial, advice and it's the reality of why people do what they do, isn't it? And I think, as you said, as humans, we've all had our own shit, we've all had our own experiences, and we've all got our own fair share of different things and trauma and different upbringings. And when you kind of build that jigsaw piece, really homes in and makes sense. But for that person in that place, that it's like they're probably, if they're addicted to something, that it's just their way of coping, isn't it? Based on trauma and events that might have happened in the past. And
Right.
I've seen that with, but also, like I said, there might be in a high stress job as well,
Sure.
like
But
in
listen,
kitchens.
one message of hope, and then I know we have to sign off. There are only two or three types of people who cannot change. One type of person is a person who has a deeply entrenched personality disorder, sociopaths, narcissists, people who have deeply entrenched borderline personality disorder. There's a whole psychological phenomenon. I hope that this changes with technology and research and everything, but basically, people who have personality disorders are pretty much doomed. They can get a little bit better, but their personality disorder is not going to change. The other type of person who is incapable of change is one that does not want to, right? But let's say that that's not a huge percentage of the population, those two categories. Everybody else, no matter how down and out you are, no matter how functional you are, no matter how happy you are, how sad you are, how depressed you are, no matter what your life circumstances, no matter how badly your attachment figures messed you up, people can change. They can and they do. And I see it 7 days a week in my office, and never, ever, ever think that you are too late to change or to have a better life. You may not be able to go back and start the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending.
No, I think that's lovely, Kevin, and I think it's so true. People can change, and like you said, there's hope. For people who are going through things or had things happen to them in their lives, and I appreciate our conversation today, and talking about this topic.
I appreciate you too, brother. Thank you for having me on. Another great conversation. God bless you, and we'll talk soon.
Cheers, Kevin. As all the best, and where can people find you as well?
Oh, my Instagram, Kevin Nahai, Nahai. Also be on the lookout. This month I'll be launching a podcast. The podcast is called Nobody Listens to Kevin, ironically. So in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to just type into Google Nobody Listens to Kevin podcast. And if you like what you heard today, then you can hear more.
Awesome. No, I look forward to launching that. I'll share and promote what you're doing. And yeah, if you ever want me as a guest, I'm happy
Of course I
to
do,
do
man.
that.
Of
Awesome.
course I do. Thank you. Talk to you
Yeah.
soon, Adam.
Cheers, Kevin. All the best, man. Cheers,
Bye,
everyone.
bro.